Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Infrastructure Live Sewer Roundtable. This is number 4. We're going to be talking about sewer infiltration and inflow today. Thanks to everyone for joining us and everyone out there on LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. That's right, guys. We're all over social media nowadays, launching this and talking about different problems and solutions. So today we're going to focus on I&I. We've had a bunch of topics last month. We talked about wastewater intelligence, not surveillance. Don't want to talk about surveillance. We want to talk about intelligence. That's what we did last time. That was very interesting. So today we're going to kick it off. We're going to start with introductions. We got a new guest to the panel, Jimmy Stewart. Thanks for joining us. Give yourself an introduction.
Well, my name is Jimmy Stewart, and I work for CTM Pipelines. And our area of expertise is basically pressure pipe inspection and rehabilitation is what I do now, but I've got probably 25 years in this industry, and I have been involved in all aspects of inspection, assessment, and primarily focusing on reduction of inflow and infiltration. So hopefully I can be productive and add to your discussion.
I'm sure you will, Jimmy. This is going to be awesome. Susan, you're up next.
I am Suzanne Chin, aka the Doo Doo Diva from the Doo Doo Diva Smells Like Money podcast, and I am the CEO and founder of Creative Raven and the Toot Group. And our job is to demystify digital marketing so folks within the wastewater and related civil infrastructure industries can take advantage of this great tool for telling their story, getting more brand awareness, and basically making more money.
Love it, Susan. Appreciate it. Thanks for joining us. Alex, you're up. Kathy, you're up next. I hit the wrong button. Kathy's up next.
That's
Forget
okay.
Alex.
I'm Cassie Clancy. I am the owner and CEO of Pipe Reline Solutions. We essentially come in as consultants, whether it's pressure pipe or stormwater pipe, and offer different solutions for rehabilitating rather than ripping and replacing.
Love it. Thanks, Cassie, for joining us. Alex, and I appreciate you rushing to get here. I know you're a busy woman putting all this post out for all the projects you got going on. I appreciate that, joining us. Alex, you're up next.
Yeah, so Alex Churchill worked with InfoSense and the sewer line rapid assessment tool for the last 12 years and have a partner, Ivan Hallett, who is the inventor. So the two of us run the company and have been doing this a long time. We help municipal utilities optimize how they maintain their wastewater collection system. And we hear very often that when we ask people what issues they're having, along with the other ones we hear about, CCTV and cleaning trucks breaking down and not having enough staff and not having enough money, one of the other big things we hear about is I&I, and that's what people, one of the big hot button issues with most of the people we're talking with.
It's so true. It is a hot topic, and that's why I wanted to talk about it today, because there's so many decades of inspection work that have been done to try and find and pinpoint I&I within collection system, basin, sub-basins, things like that. That I thought that this would be a great topic. We talk about all different kinds of unique things as far as sewers go, but this is the hot topic as of the last several years at least. So anybody in the comments section that is watching this live event, make comments. If you disagree with us, you agree with us, make a comment. We love hearing both. Doesn't always have to be negative, but we'll keep it as engaging as possible. So, Jimmy, we have been inspecting for I&I forever. Why do you think that we're still having to inspect for I&I? We haven't found that smoking gun, so to speak.
Well, thanks. First of all, I&I, inflow and infiltration. The inflow aspect of it was the direct source of inflow into a pipe. The infiltration is going to be, more coming in at pinholes, at pipe joints, at laterals, and things of that nature. As far as finding the smoking gun, I don't think that you're ever going to find a smoking gun that is going to fix all infiltration. Even during the rehabilitation processes. If you look at rehabilitating to eliminate I&I, first of all, you have to do flow monitor studies. You have to break down basins, identify where your worst areas of infiltration or I&I are coming from. And you've got to develop a plan to start eliminating those areas. And you also have to look at the return on your investment that you're getting from rehabilitating. And when I say that, you've got to rehabilitate in order to eliminate I&I in any given area. You're going to have to fix the manholes, rehabilitate them, the laterals, and the main line. Otherwise, you are not going to. All you're going to do is move the point of infiltration. The smoking gun is the inflow. You might find, the smoking gun where there's a manhole cover missing, but to find a solution to address all of it, I think that will be ongoing through the rest of our careers, because as we inspect things now, if we don't do something about them now, conditions are going to change over time. So from the time you do an I&I study until the time that you actually get all of the rehabilitation processes completed, things change.
That's
So
a
it's
great
very
point.
important it's important to understand that when you find these problems, eliminate your highest points of I&I as quick as possible, so you return on that investment, and then look at your capital improvement plan so that you can address getting the majority of it out, which is the goal, so that you can not overwhelm your plants or exceed your NPDES permits and discharge.
Good points, Jimmy. Good points. That's great explanation. Susan, what do you think about the I&I situation? Oh, you're muted. Sorry, I got you. I got you.
Sorry about that. I fully agree with Jimmy. There is no one smoking gun. However, I think one of the biggest challenges is that, when I talk to folks and municipal people, when I'm interviewing them, they will all admit that they truly believe that 70% of the I&I, the unresolved I&I, is coming on the property owner side on the lateral. So unless we can find a way to cooperate with the homeowner there's some areas that I've been hearing about where we can get temporary, eminent domain, where they're actually fixing it and working with the homeowner to have a program for the financial part of it. But some cities are actually looking at, well, if we just take on the burden of fixing that lateral for the homeowner, because we can't force them to do it. It's on their side. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. But if we fix it, the amount of money that we're going to save on the I&I and treating water coming into the plant that shouldn't be coming in, well, maybe if we take on that burden within 2 or 3 years, whatever we invested, it might just pay for itself.
Yeah.
So it's something to really, really consider. And there are a lot of areas around the country that are considering that we are going to have to take on the burden.
Yeah. Yeah. And how do you get access to everyone's house? Like, that's things I've ran into with cities where they're like, hey, we want to inspect 500 residential homes to figure out where the I&I is coming from. That's a tough task. How are you going to get permission to get in the house and check their, illegal hookups potentially?
If you've got CCTV equipment that it can inspect from the main, you're running, the lateral inspection camera was supposedly the answer to that.
We're gonna talk about that a little bit more with the CCTV. So yeah, hold your horses on that one. That's a good one. Cassie, you're up next.
Well, I know you and I were chatting this week. I'm actually on a job site here in Portland, Oregon, which is, I ran back to my hotel to do this, but this is very interesting because we're doing the work in a subdivision that's privately owned. So is it on the HOA to take care of the pipe that's potentially failing? They budgeted for it. They knew at some point this would be their responsibility. So it is a private job. However, as I was talking to the contractor the last couple of days, we've been talking back and forth. The only pipe that's really being fixed is in the subdivision. But what about where it starts and where it ends? They don't care. It's not in their subdivision. They're fixing only what's theirs. So that does create an issue of, are we really solving the entire pipe problem? No, we're just fixing what they're responsible for.
Right. Wow. Good. That's a good point. We're going to elaborate more on that in a little bit here. Alex, you're up next. Yeah, I muted you. Sorry, Alex. My bad.
Yeah, so I think everybody here had some really good points. The only things I might add or touch on, or one I think that Jimmy mentioned, a programmatic approach. I think with all these things, you don't do an I&I study and go through this whole project and think you're done. You need to be thinking about this as a continuous part of your maintenance program, and continuing to do this throughout your system. Just like maintaining your car, if you're going to replace the brakes, that's something that you have to do when they wear out. But you don't think, I'm never going to replace them again. You need to be thinking about, over time, I'm going to have to keep doing this. So that programmatic piece, I think, is important. The private property is certainly a major issue. And then the other part is, how do you pay for this? Who pays for this? And if you're the major contributor of that I&I, is there a way that you can be that can show up in your water and sewer bill, so you have that incentive to help participate in solving the problem?
Good points. Budget's another huge thing, Alex. How are you going to pay for it once you find all the I&I leaks? That kind of stuff. One thing I wanted to kind of go off of what everyone has said. And to me, just from hearing what you guys are saying, but also understanding the beginning point of construction, I talked to an engineer out of Canada, Barbara Robinson, and she was telling me that the construction and the new development is so bad that the contractors aren't backfilling properly. They're not installing laterals correctly. So this isn't just old infrastructure. You're talking about new infrastructure that's being put into the system now that is failing quickly because of poor workmanship. I mean, going back to this conversations we all had before about low bid, that's another thing, right? It's now get the contractors get the low bid. They're putting in maybe inferior products, materials, pipe, materials. And then you got more leaks keep coming into the system. So where does it end, and where do we find the money? Jimmy, do you want to talk a little bit more on like what I brought up there?
Yeah, as far as money, well, what I'd really like to speak a little bit about is the private property issue and the different policies that different utilities have across the country. Some utilities out there say we own the main line, and the homeowner owns the lateral from the main line to their house. As far as others, they say, well, we own through to the right of way, which is 5 to 10 feet inside of the property line. And, to identify, to go back to Susan's point, how do you find that? I think the most commonly used process for identifying I&I on private property is probably smoke testing. And that's something that, it takes a lot of work to do it. It's very effective. But again, when you start looking at the return on the investment, finding it and putting it on the homeowner, can they afford it? I've had conversation with utilities where it's like, okay, so you fixed your main lines, you've done your manholes. However, all your infiltration, and this was a follow-up study, and I saw one presentation one time on a utility that had basically gone in and done the main lines, the manholes, and the laterals. And in that study area, they had eliminated about 90% of the I&I coming in. Majority of the I&I coming in was from lateral connections and the private property issues. And they systematically looked through that. So as they did the main line, they kept flow monitoring. When they did the manholes, they kept flow monitoring. They started seeing a reduction a little bit, but over time, by the time they got to the laterals, that's when they saw that once they had completed the full cycle of rehabilitation, significant reduction. There's going to have to be a consensus. Every city and utility is different as to who owns what. I like the idea of maybe sharing the cost with the homeowner. I can't tell you how many times I've seen people tie the gutters off their house right into the clean out so that they didn't have water in their yard.
Right.
And, low spots all around it. So you see that kind of thing take place, and they have to be fixed. I know that when I was doing smoke testing, I asked the utility if they'd give me a box of caps because there were so many caps that were missing. And when we would go out and the smoke would be bellowing out, we'd just go ahead and stick a cap on it for them, and they could move on. But that doesn't necessarily mean that that problem's fixed. And I'll go back to the point you made, Chad, about the construction issues of it. There's a lot, even though the economy is where it is, there's still a lot of construction going on. There's not enough people out there to inspect to make sure they're going in properly. Pressure testing should be done. But to pressure test the lateral, you've got to plug the main line and make sure that it's basically no pressure leaking up to the homeowners. And then you've also got to look at what's going on around that lateral and where they made that tap in the line. I think the worst tap I've ever seen is a hammer tap, where you just bust a hole in the pipe, shove your lateral in it, and close the current around it and let it roll. That's never going to work over the long term. So I think that there probably needs to be a little bit of give and take from both the private property owners as well as the utilities on how to solve this problem. And the last point I want to make about that is very simple. It's the return on the investment. If you're just moving your source of I&I from one location to another, but you're not eliminating it, there's never going to be a return on the investment. Let's say you spend a few $100 million to do some rehabilitation work, but you don't do it all, and you see no real reduction over 15, 20%, you'll
Right.
never recuperate that money. You've got to see a significant reduction in order to make a difference. And it's a challenge that I think will be here forever.
At this point, yes, you're right. And Susan, I didn't mean to like hold your horses on the camera thing earlier. When I said that, I really wanted to get to that point with you, talking about the CCTV side of things, because you were heading in that direction. And what Jimmy was talking about is, laterals, right? Inspecting laterals. What were you gonna, talk about the inspection process?
Well, that I think that's one tool, but what Jimmy was touching on is that water is always going to find an entry point if it can.
Yeah.
It's just the nature of the beast. But just, circling back to CCTV, when you were saying about construction, after construction inspection, something that cities need to be aware of is that does not guarantee that subdivision has been done correctly. And I will just share an example. I lived in Palm Springs for many, many years, and a new subdivision went right next to my subdivision. And I saw a contractor, and I will not name names, who came in and did the inspection after they laid all the lines. And then about 6 months later, after kind of an odd, 50-year storm event, all kinds of weird things started happening. And so they sent out another inspection company to re-inspect the lines. And here there were a lot of problems. But the initial inspection showed that it was perfect. And as they dug a little deeper, what that first company did was they inspected about 2 pipelines that had been laid in this fairly large subdivision of maybe, I think there was 125 homes. And what they did was they just copied it, pasted it, copied it, pasted it. So they had 2 really good lines. And then that's the report that they sent in to the city. But probably about 60% of the subdivision had not been laid properly.
Wow.
And so this other company came in and says, well, I want to see the initial report. And it was like, well, yeah, they faked it. They absolutely faked it. So they parked the truck, did half the work. They got paid to do the whole subdivision, but didn't really do the whole subdivision. And so it's like, know who's doing your inspection.
Yeah. Great points. Wow. And that, I'm sure that happens more often than people actually know it's happening.
It does. It does. Because you know him and I know him, Asim, and from Fluid Robotics, where he actually in Mumbai, they were doing this where they were inspecting the line. So what he did, they were like copying it over and over and over again and sending it into the city. So he actually set up a software program that actually tracks. So if they do it, when they submit their reports, it puts a special code on it within the footage that if they try to repeat that, the city's going to know if they've tried to cheat or game the system.
Interesting. Wow.
Yeah.
Very cool.
I know
Cassie.
it's sad to think,
Yeah, go ahead.
it's sad to think that people would actually do that, but
it is. It's taking advantage of the
Find a
system.
way-
That's
yeah, if people can find a way to take advantage, they will.
yeah,
know?
you got to have oversight on this stuff. Cassie, go ahead. Cassie, I wanted to talk to you. And we were talking about inspections, and the story was great, Susan. When you talked about the city who didn't care about the subdivision you were talking about working in, I wanted to get to that point where you were bringing up that.
Well, so the subdivision sits, I mean, it's private property where we're doing this job right now, but both sides are private property on the other sides of the subdivision. So when we first went out last year and inspected this pipe, we did, when I say we, me, the engineer, and the construction company that was bidding this project, did discuss with both property owners on each side, and also said there is a cost savings if we do the repairs through the entire pipeline all at the same time. But both the property owners on the sides of the HOA, the subdivisions, they don't care. They're like, it's not our problem. It is going to be their problem is the issue. It's not their problem right now because the worst part of the pipeline is under the HO, is in the subdivision. Right. But if we repaired it all at once, it would save them money because at some point, whether it's 5 years or 10 years down the road, they're going to be in the same boat. And now they're going to have to attach to the property owner, the subdivision who's already repaired the pipe. And are they going to use the same solution? Is it going to be the same craftsmanship, the same contractor? Absolutely, probably not. But again, that's the short-sightedness of why don't we do it now versus later? But later, I'll deal with it later.
Well, there's still a cost to it at the treatment plant.
Sure.
I mean, it's still a cost. It's coming that everyone's got to pay for. All the ratepayers got to pay for all that water getting into the system. Go ahead, Alex. I know you've been able to find, not I&I with the SL wrap, but as you guys are out inspecting a lot of pipe, like you find sources just like other inspection companies do periodically.
And we can find it indirectly at times with the SL wrap, but it's certainly not a I&I tool. Yeah, boy, this whole conversation's just got me depressed. This sounds like a daunting task. How are we ever going to solve this? And it's like sticking your finger in the dike to do it too, right? If you don't have enough fingers to plug all the holes, you might as well just walk away because that one last hole is still gonna leak. And it makes me think, there's a lot of trade-offs here, right? The cost of doing this, why would we do this? Let's just build a bigger treatment plant. Forget who cares? I'm throwing that out as but
I was going to head there eventually. Yeah. Not to be more negative.
Yeah, but there's a lot of pieces in this and a lot of trade-offs, and you got to be really choiceful about where you're investing your money and where you're trying to fix your problems. And from what I've seen from I&I, it's the same thing that we find with the SL RAD inspections. 80%, it's the old 80-20 rule that 80% of your problem is coming from 20% of your assets. You just have to find out what those 20% are that are the biggest contributor and go after that. But this sounds like, I'm gonna I'm tired just thinking about it on Friday afternoon.
Yeah. Well, look, if you don't talk about it, then what are we ever going to fix it? Right. I guess that's the other way to look at it is, what we're talking about is real conversations that are being said out in the field, right? During construction, during these, like Cassie brought up about, when they were out in the field, just talking about the subdivision and stuff. These are the conversations that we need to bring to light, because as we're building new developments, as we're trying to catch up with whatever's leaking already and do all these different types of inspections, it's a constant, churning problem, because it's never going to get fixed. So then it makes me wonder, like, okay, well, if we're building these developments that are leaking, right, already brand new developments, and then we have an existing infrastructure that's crumbling, and with I&I getting into it, whose oversight of like the development of these new residential areas and commercial, like that seems like a good place to start. You'll start stopping the workmanship failures that are occurring, and then you might be able to catch up. Would that make more sense? Does anybody want to chime in on that? That's a negative. Nope. Nobody wants to do
Well,
it.
what was your question
Jimmy's
again,
in.
Chad?
I didn't really have a question. I'm just trying to pinpoint where we can start finding these issues and solving them. Because if it's development and the new infrastructure, right? Because I've found new precast manholes leaking like sieves. Like during our inspection time back at RMS, like we would find hundreds of manholes, new subdivision, maybe 5 years old, leaking like sieves. So that tells me new construction, new infrastructure being put in place. Someone's not watching the construction process. That's what that tells me. So we have something going on either with the designing, the planning, or the construction. I think it might be during the construction. That's kind of where it says heading towards. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll elaborate a little bit on that. And first of all, Alex, I do like your statement referencing build a bigger treatment plant. You can probably get a job at any engineering firm you want to
No doubt.
a lot of times they feel like that's the solution. It might be the solution if there's tremendous growth or industry in that area. And I want to throw you out one instance that has taken place recently. The utility had a tremendous amount of I&I. They went out to get the funding to expand their plant because they're right on the borderline of their NPDES permits. So they got a lot of money to rebuild the plant. And GIFA, this was in Georgia, came back and said, well, what have you done to eliminate your I&I? Before we give you this money to rebuild and enlarge your plant or do the work to it, we want to see that you're at least making an effort to try to eliminate the I&I. So a prerequisite to them getting the funding is that they have to perform an I&I study to identify, where their worst sources of I&I are and come up with a plan to eliminate them. But then that goes back to that catch-22 where that specific utility says that we only own the main line, we own the laterals. So all they're going to do is move the point of infiltration. And your question that
Yeah, it wasn't really a question I had. It was just us just chatting about the I&I issue. Flow monitoring. We can pivot to flow monitoring because that was on my list to talk about, because that's one of the main tools engineering firms, inspection companies use to try and track down I&I. We've been using flow meters for decades, and we can only, from what I understand, Doppler sensors can with the bands down in the sewer system can only go in so much depth. So you're only tracking 2 to 5 miles of a basin, and you're not really getting into the smaller, that 20% everyone's kind of talking about of that basin, because you can't get any kind of flow meters to really get in there. Now there is ultrasonic level meters and stuff like that. So what do you guys think about flow monitoring? Yeah, go ahead, Susan. I didn't mute you this time. You muted yourself. Oh, you're still muted. Hold on.
Nope. I just saw something really, really cool. As I said, I wish Eric were here. That I actually got to see how it worked and see it live when he described it. Is this device that is bolted onto the bottom of a smart cover, composite cover. I believe it comes from a company out of Israel, where this device can actually, it's cheaper than the typical, flow monitoring that's like 25, 30,000. They put this on the bottom of the manhole. And I don't ask me, I don't know how it works, but it actually tracks the data, collects the data, puts it into software, sends it up to the cloud for flow monitoring. And this is ideal for small communities that don't have the funds to use a large flow monitoring study, but they can track a basin, and then it's not permanent. They can take it and move it from place to place to place within a basin and collect this data on I&I. It was pretty amazing to see this. And this was at the Montana Rural Water Association.
Okay. Interesting. Yeah, there's a bunch of technology.
It sounded like it's a fairly new technology, but it bolted it was kind of weird. It bolted to the bottom of the lid, and then it had like this thing that just kind of came down. And I don't know how it works, but it's able to measure the flow without the confined space entry, without it being permanently affixed to the wall. It was kind of basically a better mousetrap. That's how I saw it, a better mousetrap for flow monitoring. And the fact that it was portable and that it didn't take a lot of tools or an expert to go in there to move it from place to place. I was impressed.
Yeah.
Susan,
Go
I guess
ahead,
that's
Cassie.
a question on
Have you
that.
seen
What would
it,
be the
Cassie?
benefit? What would be the benefit of moving it around? Is it just an expensive enough technology that you wouldn't put it on every single one of them, or you're just trying to collect different data points?
What I got from it, it was inexpensive, so you can leave it in a spot for a while. But once you've done that study, you can take them and move them to another area because you collected your data.
Okay.
That was what I got out of it. And so you could put, because they're so inexpensive, you can put them on every single manhole in a basin that you're suspecting is problematic. And then once you collect the data, you can take it and move it to another section in your town. So, like Jimmy was saying, instead of not being able to like put one here because it's so expensive and one here, you're not getting the total picture of that basin. That what they've done is they've made it affordable so that you could get more robust data and tracking it.
Mm-hmm.
So
I didn't get enough time to spend with them, but I
Go
got
ahead.
enough that I understood. Oh, wow. Actually, Eric, we did a podcast on this. If you want to look it up, that I did on my podcast with Eric, that he actually showcased this and how the software tracks it for what it's doing. It's a
Go
new
ahead,
technology, but
Go
they're
ahead,
afraid.
Alex.
We talked about it. Early adopters. Everybody's afraid to try
Yeah.
something new. But
Yeah,
anyway.
no, Smart Cover's been around for a while. It's been a great technology for its surcharging monitoring, from what I understand. It sounds like it could be adapted to I&I, but go ahead, Alex, chime in.
yeah, so that's where I was going to go. Is
Yeah.
sometimes you get what you pay for, and sometimes you need to know what the right tool is for the right application. And so and I am not a flow metering expert, but there are essentially two different kinds of flow meters. There's a level only, which sounds similar to what you're talking about, Susan. That's going to measure the level, but not necessarily the velocity of the water. And there's a number of those technologies out there that are great. There's Eye Tracker, Echo, Smart Cover. I have nothing to do with any of those products, but they're from a business standpoint, I'm aware of them, but we don't do anything with those. But those are all level only sensors, and it's much simpler to get the level only piece than it is to get the velocity. And you really need to have something if you're going to use something to bill a customer. If you have a factory and you want to measure it at a billing quality piece, you've got to have that velocity and the level. And so I think that gets into a different kind of meter, and that does get into confined space entry and calibration, and there's a lot that goes into doing that. And I think they both have their place. It depends on what your objective is and what your application is, whether you need the $20,000 or $30,000 one, or you need the $2,000 or $3,000 one.
Yeah, 100% on point, Alex, with that stuff. Go ahead, Jimmy. Do you want to say something? Cassie?
Yeah, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about just basic flow monitoring from back when I was a younger person.
Yes, love it. Let's do this.
It's all based on the Manning theory, which is basically your area, your velocity, that gives you your volume. And once you know what that volume is, and that can give you an idea of exactly how much flow is coming in. You look at dry weather, you look at wet weather. If you look at an RDI&I analysis, which is a rain dependent inflow and infiltration analysis, you have to take into consideration the ground saturation levels, how much rain you get, and then you look at these curves. And as these curves take place, what you see is if you're ground saturated, you get a lot of rain, you're going to see, a relatively steep curve in your RDI&I analysis. If the ground level is dry, it's not as quick a curve. So if you find a direct point of infiltration, you might see a rain gauge that says, hey, we got 3 inches of rain. And all of a sudden that thing shoots off the charts. You've got direct inflow. So that's kind of the basis behind traditional flow monitoring, which is still in practice today. So, Susan, when you started talking about some of these sensors and being able to move them, what we're really looking for is the depth and the velocity. So there are a lot of different tools out there that you can use that are relatively inexpensive that will give you depth and the velocity. And if you're able to go in and you know, I'll take a big, let's take a whole town, for instance. They might have 8 or 9 big basins. So they want to start in what they have or consider their worst basin. So let's start in that basin and then let's pick all of these different junctions where you've got everything coming together. That gives you a good start in where to put area velocity meters to measure, how much INI is there. From that point, I loved your point about having these portable units, because what happens is you can start moving them. You know what your baseline is based on the amount of rain. You know what's flowing through that meter. You might always want to leave that one permanent meter there, but then start moving to different locations throughout that one basin, unless you're taking on a huge city, and do a basin at a time. Then you can move these less expensive units and see what your level is. They're very sophisticated now. You get your depth, you get your velocity. It's all based on ultrasonics. It's pretty cool because you can move those units around, and they're as easy as moving one and snapping it onto the side of a manhole, mounting it underneath the cover. Some of them are cellular uplink, some of them are RF uplink, building a network that communicates with every node. There's a lot of different types of systems out there, and some of them are really, really inexpensive. Most of the new ones you see coming out are also intrinsically safe, and I'm going to refer to one in particular technology, and that's with an RF technology where you don't have to pay for a satellite uplink or a cellular uplink to upload the data. It basically communicates through an RF signal. It goes to one location. All of that is uplinked to a cloud, and you get the data. You can move these systems around, get the information, and with that information, you can make a decision on where are my worst neighborhoods, or where are the worst parts, or wait a minute, this main line runs to the bottom of a creek, and that creek floods all the time. Let's go look for some manhole covers that are off. I'm sure all of you been to cities that have manholes with riser joints on them that are, 10, 15 feet above the creek. Well, when that creek flows or fills, sometimes those risers are gone and you got 48 inches of direct inflow throwing in. So there's a lot of different things that I think as a industry, we need to be a little bit more proactive about. And then we need to stay on top of the tools that are available and what's the most cost effective solution for us to identify the areas that are problematic. And then not just get this data, but use this data to make a decision on how to repair the problem and see a return on the investment. And I'm really big about the ROI, because it drives me crazy when I used to do I&I studies, and it's like they come back 4 years later and I'm like, well, can I put some flow meters back in here? You've just spent, a couple $100 million or more, and I want to see what the difference is. They said no. I said I'll do it for free. And I did it for free. And I said, man, you know what? You eliminated 15% of your I&I. How long is it going to take you to get that money back? It'll never be returned.
That's good points, Jimmy. I thought you were going to say old school popping manholes and during rain events doing nighttime isolation or something too. I thought that was what you're going to throw out there.
I've been there. I would rather stick with the Manning theory, because I'm too old to be pulling too many manhole lids and covers, especially in the swamp.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the way things have progressed, that I've talked to the public works directors, been around for 40 years. They're like, yeah, we don't use any of those sensors. We don't use any of that flow monitoring stuff. We just go out when rain events, we pop manholes. We know where I&I is. And I'm like, how? They're like, the levels. It's not rocket science. Literally, if there's 5 houses hooked up to a sewer line, a 6-inch or 8-inch, and it's raining, and you go out, pop the manhole, and the level's 2, 3, 4 inches, it's obvious you have a problem. That's kind of how you isolate it, right? That's the concept that's been done for a while. So, Alex, you unmuted. What do you want to say?
I was just going to say that's not what I would call a programmatic approach. So that's my local community has 88,000 manholes. So how many people are you going to send out during a rain event to pop manhole lids and find your problems? And we hear the same thing with our product. We know where all our problems are. Really, you know where all the problems are that you know of. And I always come back to Donald Rumsfeld. At one point said there's the known unknowns and the unknown unknowns. We're more worried about the unknown unknowns. So I think that's when you're popping manhole lids, it's a start, but it's not a programmatic way to be looking at your system.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, if you look at flow monitoring, though, going back to kind of that as the next step, right? That was the old way of doing things. Now we don't have enough manpower, resources. We're flow monitoring 2 to 5 mile basins, trying to understand where how to prioritize each basin, right? To use those flow monitors. There's a lot of maintenance with the flow monitors that, especially the ones in the band and the Doppler sensors. So it becomes very costly to put these flow meters in. And that's what I think Jimmy was kind of talking about, some of the costs associated to it. And then, the goal is to find what's leaking. What is it, a manhole? Is it the sewer pipe? What section? Where is it coming from? It's super hard to do, though, once you establish that one basin is a priority, a high priority, right? So that basin now, how do you start to track the I&I down? And that's smoke testing. That's level meters, like you were talking about, Susan. That's really starting to isolate where the problem's coming from. Seems to be the more practical approach to prioritizing these basins. However, I think cities I've heard this before from cities where we've done the I&I inspections through our whole system. We know high priority, like we kind of just talked about, like we know which basins are the worst. Now we just don't have the money to keep spending on finding it and fixing it. That's the other thing that you kind of deal with is trying to figure out where all the I&I is coming from, but how are we going to spend the money to fix it? So that's where a lot of the engineering side comes in, where they want to find the capital projects for finding the sewer pipes that are leaking, the manholes that are leaking. Otherwise, it's upgrade your wastewater treatment plant. I mean, that's kind of the alternative, right? It's either pay now or pay later, so to speak. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but it's kind of the way I look at it.
So
go ahead, Jimmy.
Through a curveball at you. Back years and years ago, the EPA came out with the Clean Water Act.
Yeah.
Okay. So basically, let's separate all our sewers. We're still trying to separate them all, but at the same time, and I understand a lot of it. The key to eliminating pollution is dilution. All right. So that's what happens at the plant. You start looking at all this I&I, and maybe part of the answer is looking at, how are we going to get rid of it? But also, when they have rain events, if you look at the cost of treating, as long as they're not exceeding their NPDES permits because the water is more diluted, there's less chemicals used to treat the waste. And that's a simple fact. So, it makes me wonder, and I was at EPA one time and I asked them some questions and I already knew the answers to them, but at the same time, it was like, why are you going to separate it? And, you're trying to eliminate the cost of hundreds of millions of dollars to build a plant, and you're trying to eliminate having, wastewater go into a stormwater system. It might have been a better approach, might have been tying that stormwater system into the treatment plant, letting them build bigger plants and spend less money on chemical feeds. Just, something that I've talked with other engineers about and tried to understand the whole philosophy. But then again, we know that sometimes, hindsight's 20/20, and they could have looked at it a little bit differently.
Yeah. Go ahead, Alex.
It sounds like you're getting back to my build a bigger plant thing from earlier.
He was. He definitely was. That's for sure.
Want to go work with me at an engineering firm?
I'm really happy. I'm happy where I'm at.
Yeah, you're in good shape there, Jimmy. You're working with Chris. He couldn't make it, and I'm so happy you're here to join us because I is obviously your topic that you know a lot
Yeah.
about. So this is great.
Well,
Uh,
I spent probably 20 years dealing with SSES programs.
I'm sure that if Chuck Hansen was here right now, he'd be really talking about the leaks and pressure pipes and the pipe inspection tools that he uses for electro scan with the. But I think bringing up that I think what I was getting at is we have a much bigger problem right now, and that's a lot of leaks, big leaks, not small leaks. We're talking about like clean out caps broken over top. We got inflow coming in there. We have broken pipe just oozing in tons of rainwater into the system. So finding little pinhole leaks, things like that I've heard people talking about, that's not our problem right now. Our problem is big stuff, big leaks, near streams, and like we talked about before.
And the
So
problem is finding it, right? You have
yeah, like
88,000 manholes. Which one, or which 100, or which 1,000, or which 5,000 are contributing the most to my problem, and how do I cheaply get enough information to figure out which ones those are and address the issues?
well, you can't CCTV during the time. Well, most people don't CCTV during rain events that I know of, and that's when you're going to find a lot of the I&I. That's just not feasible financially, right? To do that, but you can CCTV and see staining, and different inspection cameras will find the staining and the weeping and stuff like that we do for all these different codes. But that's it's still difficult to track down where the groundwater is going to raise up or where it's not, depending on the amount of rain. You talk about weather, climate change, talked about that this morning on a podcast. Like, climate change is a big issue right now. One part of the city can get not 8 inches, but maybe 8 inches, and the other half doesn't get 8 inches. That kind of exaggerated, but that's kind of the weather we're living in these days, where you're going to get different fluctuations of rain events in different parts of your town, and you're not going to really be able to control those type of things, and you got to deal with the issues at the plant. Is there anything else you guys were thinking about that we want to talk about with this I&I? I was going to go down a rabbit hole with a whole different thing, and I've decided not to do that, and that's mostly because I think that I'm going to touch on a little bit. There's a lot of money in flow monitoring, a ton. There's maintenance on these meters constantly being done weekly. Clean off the meters, clean off the bands, clean off that stuff. And we're talking about adding velocity. And Susan, you were talking about level technology. And I think we need to start looking at a way to use level technology in this process, because as you guys all alluded to, you need another tool. It can't just be a flow meter at 2 miles, 5 miles telling us the information from a basin. We need to get these level sensors in those small basins, sub basins, to really track down where the I&I is coming from. And I really think that's what we need to start getting our minds off of, like flow metering and making hourly revenue off of weekly maintenance and all this stuff, because it's needed. Yeah, you need that information, but you also need to start thinking about how to be more proactive and get into that basin and really start digging into where the problems are. So I don't know if that really anybody else wants to elaborate on that, but yeah, Cassie, go ahead.
I think I'm going back to what Jimmy said, like at the very beginning, and we've talked about it over and over, Chad. It's reactive versus proactive. And I mean, you guys know so much more than I do when it comes to the pressurized sewer pipes and I&I. So I learn a lot every time I join one of these, but I still feel like no matter whether you're talking about a sewer system, potable water, whatever we're talking about, at least everything I've seen in my 5 years of experience in the pipe world is we're always being reactive and there's no proactive.
Yeah.
How do we change as an industry? How do we change that mindset? I need to spend the money in advance, so then I'm not doing the emergency repairs. I'm not in a major storm event. I'm not in a screwed situation. Excuse my language if that's
bad. But you're fine. That wasn't bad.
Talk about that. Elaborate on that a little bit, Cassie. Most everybody is in a reactive mode. There's a lot of utilities out there that want to be proactive, taking the steps to be proactive. It's a very time-consuming process. It's a very expensive process. And when you start looking at reacting to a major break or a problem, the cost for that repair is probably 10x what the cost of the planned repair is. So I think the key is to educating people on there are technologies, there are processes, there are programs, O&M programs that can keep you in a proactive mode. And I think that's really the key. And, we can talk till we're blue in the face, and there's always going to be somebody else out there that is going to do it another way, has another idea when, the technology providers, your, you know, product providers that have all these great tools, whether it's for flow monitoring or whatever it might be, have tools that eliminate problems. You're going to have standards that are already in place. And Susan, you mentioned copy and paste. Well, how about the RFP that comes out and gets copy and pasted from something that's happened? They used this process 10 years ago, and I'm reading RFP and I'm like, wait a minute, I thought this for this city, not for this city. Same engineering firm copied and pasted. They forgot to do global change on the Word document. But one of the points that you made, Chad, that I thought was really good, if you go out and start trying to find all this I&I, you're going to spend a lot of money. Okay, so when you get ready to enter into an I&I study, you've got to have an end goal in sight. And let's say we're going to go study a basin. If you are in the capital improvement planning part of your utility, you've got to know that you have problems to start with. So the first step in finding these problems is going to be finding where they are and how bad they are. You've got to plan accordingly for the worst, that if we flow monitor 250 miles, then so much of this basin is going to have to be rehabilitated, manholes, main lines, and laterals. If you don't have the money allocated to spend at least within the next year in a capital improvement plan, why don't you just run into failure and pay it finance?
Yeah.
That's my question.
And build a bigger plan.
And build a bigger.
Forget it. Yeah, just build a bigger plan. It's a lot easier. Sounds like a lot of work.
Well,
that's
but
funny.
at the end of the day, I think from a planning perspective, and I've met with lots of engineers and talked about that, and I've gone in and probably talked myself out of a job because I said, I'm going to find problems. I said, I'll be glad to tell you where they're at, but when are you going to fix them? Oh, we might be able to fix those in 5 years. I said, in 5 years, my flow monitoring study that I'm doing for you is useless. Unless you want it for 5 years, then I'll give you a discount, and I'll actually give you the meters, because instead of leasing them to me, you'll have paid for them by 10 times in the 5 years. So, but I really look for new technologies that are out there, because when Chad, you referenced the level sensors. These
Right.
level sensors now have the technology to measure velocity. If we know the pipe size, we know the velocity, and we know the level, we can calculate the volume. That's all cloud-based and all can be used in an AI situation to basically perform flow monitoring. And
Yeah.
and I mean, I've got price sheets on some of these, different items, and know the cost of them, and it's getting less and less expensive, and technologies advance, and more people enter the market.
Yeah, Jimmy, you're 100% on point. The objections I used to get when I tried to work with engineering firms to bring new technology like these level meters to fruition, just bring it out there and show people it's not Manning's equation. The technology at the time didn't do velocity. We're just looking at levels. So we were getting some insight of like what was happening in the sewer system. We didn't have the velocity. I get it. But that was all I got kickback is like, nope, not going to use it. Manning's equation, that's the way to go. Something that we use for 50 years now. And I'm like, wait, what? But we're looking at levels. It's different. It's like a different way of interpreting data. Data can be used in different ways. It doesn't necessarily have to be used in the same Manning's equation for 60 years from now. Seriously.
One of the good things about a level sensor, let's say that you've got hotspots within your city that constantly overflow. And let's say
There
that
you
you've
go.
got, you put a level sensor in there, it sends it sends a message to your phone that says, hey, the level's rising. Hey, the level's up 2 more feet. You know that you've got about X number of minutes to get there with a vac truck
There
to
you
clear
go.
that blockage before it's going to overflow. And these things are great to have because every overflow, if it's got to be reported. If it gets into a waterway, you're even in more trouble. So
Right.
having these level sensors in key locations is critical. And as I mentioned, Susan, some of the new technologies out there also will capture the velocity and the volume as well as the level. So you can still use they're getting so less expensive. It's a great way to look at things, but how are we going to teach an old dog new tricks?
There you go. That's it right there, for sure. Does anybody else want to add anything? We got 4 more minutes left.
Well, Jimmy, you were just right. The one that I did see measured all kinds of different things. But what I loved about it was the cloud-based software that was attached to it that
Yeah.
did all of this detailed analysis. But because something you mentioned early on is that it establishes that baseline first and then starts doing all of that comparison over time. And the analysis reports that came back out of it from the location and where when you were saying those hot spots, the reports that came back out of that were absolutely fantastic.
Yeah.
That made it
Love
so
it.
easy for you to decide what you're going to do. It's like I did an ad years ago where it was a hand like rolling some dice down like a crapshoot down a boardroom table, and it said, "Is this how you are making your capital improvement project decisions?"
Yeah.
And unless you've got data, and technology is just it's improving every day, where it's really able to do all of this analysis for you through AI. I think that's going to be the thing of teaching people. We're not asking you to do more work. This tool is doing the work for you. So here you're going to have all this data. Now, maybe you really can shift from being, like Hesse was saying, reactive to proactive.
Great.
Have that particular, because a lot of these tools, even with pipeline inspections, there's a new one coming out that I just saw that is actually allowing these analysis tools predictive analysis as to the likelihood of when a pipeline could fail. It's not the perfect crystal ball or a fortune teller, but giving you a pretty good idea of you need to keep an eye on this one because we see this one has a really good chance of failing based on what we're seeing in the history of this, probably within the next year.
Here's what I think our next conversation is going to be. We got a couple minutes left, 2 minutes to be precise. Data. Look, I've been in this space where I've seen data manipulation all over the place. Flow meter data manipulation always happening. Who's going to oversee this? The cities don't have time to do it. How do we know that's accurate data? Who's massaging the data? Like, I've heard all these different phrases going on out there. So maybe our conversation next time is like, where's the data? Like, is it good data or bad data? I think those are things that people probably would want to know. Like, we have all these instruments collecting the data, but is it accurate? Right? It's kind of like the water meter issue on that side of things. Is it accurate? So, well, thank you. I don't want to leave on a negative side of things. This is, we're upgrading every wastewater treatment plant across the country at this point, according to Alex. We didn't mean to beat up on any engineering firm or nothing like that. We need to get pumped up and obviously, bring excitement to the technology that we're bringing into the space, because it's true. We just need to embrace the technology. Someone said that earlier. I think it was Alex or somebody, but that's really where we need to get to. We need to embrace this technology. We need to stop sticking to traditional ways and methods and start looking at technology like Susan's talking about to really impact finding I&I, and then increasing our ways we're inspecting new construction, right? Making sure the workmanship's there to be done correctly, right? We don't have to struggle to try and find I&I, the new construction that's happening out there. That's just causing more problems for us down the road. So anything else, everybody? Awesome.
Thanks for having me, Chad.
Thank you guys so much for joining me. Have a great weekend. Have a great spring break, whoever's doing that. And thank you so much. Have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right.